Two exhausted 9-year-old girls stop at a fence where one reveals their father's message about enduring love, unraveling a decades-old mystery that will reshape an entire frontier town. The dust hung thick in the air like powdered bone, settling on everything the drought had already claimed. Two small figures moved slowly across the cracked earth, their bare feet leaving shallow prints in dirt that hadn't seen rain in 3 months. The older girl, maybe 9, dragged a burlap sack behind her while the younger one clutched a tin cup that caught the dying light of the western sun. They stopped at a weathered fence post where barbed wire sagged between rotting wood. The older girl wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of clean skin across the grime. "I can't walk no more, Sarah," the younger one whispered. Her voice cracked like the earth beneath them. Sarah looked back toward the cluster of buildings that made up Redemption Creek, then ahead to where the fence line disappeared into rolling hills. Her dark eyes held something too old for her years. "We're almost there, Emma. Just past that ridge." Emma sank down beside the fence post, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. "Why couldn't we take the wagon road?" "Because Papa said to stay hidden." Sarah knelt beside her sister, pulling a dented canteen from the sack. "Here, just a sip." As Emma drank, Sarah's gaze fixed on something carved into the fence post. Letters, weathered, but still visible. JM plus ER, 1847. Her finger traced the heart carved around the initials. "Sarah?" Emma lowered the canteen. "What Papa told us to say about Mama. What about it?" Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He said to tell her he still loves her." Sarah's hand froze on the carved heart. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. "That don't make sense," Sarah said slowly. "Mama's been dead since you were born." "That's what I thought too." Emma's eyes were wide, frightened. "But Papa was crying when he said it. And he gave me this." She pulled a small object from her pocket. A locket, tarnished silver with a broken chain. Sarah took the locket with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. On the opposite side, an inscription, "To my beloved James, forever yours, Eleanor, 1846. The wind picked up, rattling the barbed wire and sending tumbleweeds rolling across their path. In the distance, a church bell tolled 6 times. "We need to keep moving," Sarah said, but her voice had changed. "Before dark." They climbed through a gap in the fence and continued up the ridge. As they crested the hill, a small farmhouse came into view, smoke rising from its chimney. A woman in a blue dress stood in the garden, her back to them as she tended to a row of struggling vegetables. "Is that her?" Emma whispered. Sarah studied the woman's silhouette, comparing it to the photograph in the locket. The same graceful neck, the same way of holding her shoulders. But it couldn't be. It couldn't be. "Stay here," Sarah told her sister. "If something goes wrong, you run back to town. You find Sheriff Morrison and you tell him everything." "Sarah, I'm scared." "Me too." Sarah squeezed Emma's hand. "But Papa said this was important. More important than anything." Sarah approached the garden slowly, her footsteps crunching on dried leaves. The woman turned at the sound and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The face from the locket, older now, but unmistakable. The same kind eyes, though they held a deep sadness that hadn't been there in the photograph. "Can I help you, child?" the woman asked, her voice gentle but cautious. Are you Eleanor Hartwell?" The woman's face went pale. She glanced quickly toward the house, then back at Sarah. "Who's asking?" "My name is Sarah McKinnon. This is my sister Emma." Sarah gestured for Emma to come forward. "Our Papa sent us." "McKinnon." Eleanor's voice was barely audible. "James McKinnon." Yes, ma'am. Eleanor's legs seemed to give out. She sank onto a wooden crate beside the garden, her hands shaking. How did he find me? He's been looking for you for 9 years, Sarah said. Ever since Emma was born and we thought you died. Died? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweet Jesus. He thinks I'm dead? Emma stepped forward, pulling the locket from her pocket. Papa said to give you this, and to tell you, he still loves you. Eleanor took the locket with trembling hands, pressing it to her chest. My babies, she whispered. My beautiful babies. Mama? Emma's voice was small, uncertain. Eleanor opened her arms and both girls rushed into her embrace. For a moment, the only sound was their quiet sobbing and the wind through the dying corn stalks. I don't understand, Sarah said, pulling back to look at her mother's face. Everyone said you died. There was a funeral. Papa cried for months. Eleanor wiped her eyes with her apron. Come inside. There's much you need to know. The farmhouse was small but clean, with wildflowers in mason jars on the windowsills. Eleanor poured them each a glass of milk and cut thick slices of cornbread while they sat at a rough wooden table. 9 years ago, Eleanor began, your father and I lived in Redemption Creek. We were happy, or so I thought. But James had debts. Gambling debts to some very dangerous men. She paused, looking out the window toward the setting sun. One night, 3 men came to our house. They said James owed them $5,000, and if he couldn't pay, they'd take it out of his hide. Or mine. Or yours, Sarah. Sarah's hand tightened around her glass. What happened? Your father made a deal with them. He'd work off the debt, but they had to leave us alone. They agreed, but with one condition. Eleanor's voice broke. I had to disappear. Forever. They said if I ever came back to Redemption Creek, if I ever tried to contact James or you children, they'd kill all of us. So you left, Emma said quietly. I had no choice. They staged my death. A fire at the old mill. A body burned beyond recognition. James believed it because he had to believe it. It was the only way to keep you safe. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. But Papa's been working himself to death trying to pay off those debts. He barely sleeps, barely eats. And all this time, you've been here, alive. I've been dying a little more each day, Eleanor said. Watching from a distance as you girls grew up without me, seeing James age 10 years and 5. But I couldn't risk your lives. Who were they? Sarah's voice was hard now, angry. These men who took you away from us? Eleanor hesitated. The Garrett brothers. They run most of the gambling and drinking in 3 counties. But Sarah, you can't... Can't what? Can't tell Papa you're alive? Can't bring our family back together? It's not that simple. They have eyes everywhere. If they find out I've made contact with you... A sound outside made them all freeze. Hoofbeats, approaching fast. Eleanor rushed to the window and her face went white. Get down, she whispered urgently. Both of you under the table, now. The girls scrambled under the table as Eleanor smoothed her dress and walked to the door. Sarah could see her mother's hands shaking as she reached for the handle. The door opened before Eleanor could touch it. A tall man in a black coat stepped inside, his spurs jangling with each step. Behind him came 2 others, their faces hard and weathered. Evening, Mrs. Hartwell, the tall man said, tipping his hat mockingly. Or should I say Mrs. McKinnon? I don't know what you mean, Mr. Garrett. Don't you? He walked slowly around the room, his eyes taking in every detail. Funny thing happened today. 2 little girls were seen walking out of town heading this direction. 2 little girls who look remarkably like someone we used to know. Sarah felt Emma's hand grip hers under the table. Through the tablecloth, she could see the man's boots as he moved closer. Now, Eleanor, we had an agreement, a very clear agreement. You stay dead, and your family stays alive. Simple as that. I've kept my word, Eleanor said, but her voice wavered. Have you? Garrett's voice was silk over steel. Because it seems to me like you've had some visitors today. He stopped directly in front of the table. Sarah held her breath, certain he could hear her heartbeat. You know what I think happened? Garrett continued. I think James McKinnon finally figured out his wife didn't really die in that fire. I think he sent his daughters to find you, and I think you're about to make a very foolish mistake. Please, Eleanor whispered. They're just children. Children who can identify us. Children who know their mother is alive. Children who will run straight back to their father with this information. Sarah heard the sound of a gun being cocked. Which means our arrangement has been compromised. Wait. Eleanor's voice was stronger now. There's another way. I'm listening. Let me come back with you. Let me face James myself. I'll tell him I faked my death because I didn't love him anymore. I'll break his heart so completely he'll never look for me again. And the children? They'll believe what their father believes. That I'm not worth loving. Sarah's chest burned with rage and heartbreak. She could see her mother's feet, planted firmly despite her fear. Eleanor was willing to sacrifice her own happiness, her own life to protect them. But Sarah had heard enough. She rolled out from under the table, coming up with the carving knife Eleanor had used to cut the cornbread. Get away from my mother, she said, her young voice steady despite her terror. Garrett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Well, looks like we have a little fighter. Sarah, no, Eleanor pleaded. You want to know what I think? Sarah said, taking a step toward Garrett. I think you're scared. I think you're scared because Papa's been asking questions around town. I think you're scared because people are starting to remember things that don't add up. Garrett's smile faded. What kind of things? What? Like how the mill fire started right after you and your brothers were seen there. Like how the body they found was wearing Mama's dress but had different colored hair. Like how Sheriff Morrison's been real interested in reopening some old cases. It was a bluff, but Sarah saw something flicker in Garrett's eyes. Fear. You're lying. Am I? Then why are you here? Why not just let us have our reunion and go on with your business? Emma crawled out from under the table, moving to stand beside her sister. Because you need us to stay quiet, she said, her voice small but determined. And dead people can't talk. Garrett raised his gun, pointing it at Sarah. Smart girls. Too smart for their own good. But not smart enough, said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. James McKinnon stood in the entrance, his own gun drawn, flanked by Sheriff Morrison and 2 deputies. Hello, Eleanor, James said softly, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. James, Eleanor's voice broke on his name. Papa! Emma ran to him and he caught her with his free arm while keeping his gun trained on Garrett. How did you find us? Garrett snarled. Same way I found out my wife was still alive, James said. I started asking the right questions to the right people. Turns out when you threaten a man's family, he gets real motivated to dig up the truth. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. Marcus Garrett, you're under arrest for extortion, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can. Morrison held up a leather-bound ledger. Found this in your office safe. Real detailed records of all your business dealings, including the arrangement you made with Mrs. McKinnon here. As the deputies moved to arrest the 3 men, James holstered his gun and walked slowly toward Eleanor. They stood facing each other across the small room, 9 years of separation and pain between them. I thought you were dead, he said simply. I thought it was the only way to keep you alive. We've both been fools. Eleanor laughed through her tears. The worst kind of fools, the kind who love each other too much to think straight. James reached out, touching her face gently. Can you forgive me? For the debts, for the danger I put you in? Can you forgive me for letting you believe I was dead? Already have. They came together then, holding each other as if they could make up for 9 lost years in a single embrace. Sarah and Emma joined them, and for the first time since Emma was born, the McKinnon family was whole. Later, as the sun set behind the hills and the Garrett brothers were led away in chains, the family sat on Eleanor's front porch. James had his arm around his wife, while the girls leaned against their parents. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we go home," James said. "All of us." "To Redemption Creek?" Eleanor smiled, the sadness finally leaving her eyes. "To wherever we're together." Emma pulled out the locket, holding it up so it caught the last rays of sunlight. "Papa, why did you keep this all these years?" James looked at his wife, then at his daughters. "Because some things are worth holding on to, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. And some things," Eleanor added, "are worth fighting for no matter how long it takes." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah understood something she hadn't before. Love wasn't just about the good times, the easy moments. It was about the choice to keep loving even when everything seemed lost. It was about the courage to hope when hope seemed foolish. It was about 2 little girls walking across a drought-stricken landscape to deliver a message that would change everything. He still loves you. And sometimes, that's all it takes to bring the dead back to life. The McKinnon family rode back to Redemption Creek together under a canopy of stars, their wagon wheels turning toward home, toward a future they'd almost lost, but had fought to reclaim. Behind them, Eleanor's small farmhouse stood empty, but it had served its purpose. It had been a place of hiding, of waiting, of hope preserved against all odds. Now it was time for new beginnings. In the distance, the church bell of Redemption Creek tolled midnight, welcoming them home. If this story of love, sacrifice, and family reunion in the Old West moved you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, we'll explore another tale from the frontier. The preacher's daughter who robbed banks to save her town. A story that will challenge everything you think you know about right and wrong. Until then, remember that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of courage.